Hi guys, the World Cup is in full swing, the Serie A hiatus is ongoing, so I thought now was the time to make a video about the runaway league leaders, Napoli. If you're interested in knowing how exactly they've got to where they are today, keep watching. I will try my best to break it down for you. Now, before we can begin to assess Napoli's exploits this season, we really need to set them against the context of what they managed in the previous campaign. We left Napoli at the back end of May in third spot. They eventually finished 7 points behind eventual champions Milan. But it was a season tinged with regret. There were a trio of home league defeats in December against Atalanta, Empoli and Spezia, the latter two in rather comical circumstances. And they also took just 1 point from a possible 9 either side of Easter in fixtures against Fiorentina, Roma and Empoli, two of which again came at the Maradona. So come the end of the season, many Napoli supporters and observers alike of the Italian game as a whole were left scratching their heads and wondering how on earth Napoli didn't end their 32-year wait for the league title. There followed a summer of upheaval, to say the least. 5 senior players moved on to pastures new: goalkeeper David Ospina, talismanic central defender Kalidou Koulibaly, goal-scoring midfielder Fabian Ruiz, their Neapolitan captain Lorenzo Insigne, and last but by no means least, their all-time leading goalscorer Dries Mertens. Essentially, the owner, Aurelio De Laurentiis, gave the sporting director, Cristiano Giuntoli, carte blanche to strip out the entire spine of the team. And not just any team either. This was a Napoli side that had thrived in recent years, a Napoli team that had dazzled neutrals, particularly under Maurizio Sarri, going so close to winning the league title on several occasions. Not only under Sarri, they also finished as runners-up under Carlo Ancelotti. Despite that, Napoli decided to change tack. They reduced the wage bill and replaced those senior players with relative unknown quantities, the likes of Georgian winger Kvicha Kvaratskhelia and Korean central defender Kim Min-jae. But naturally, people were left wondering how on earth Napoli would fare this season, having lost so much dressing room experience, and how on earth they would go about compensating and replacing hundreds of appearances and hundreds of goals after the departure of the likes of Insigne and indeed Dries Mertens, not to mention Koulibaly. Many people therefore wondered how Napoli would fare this season, and understandably, plenty of people predicted them to finish outside the top 4, if not even further down when it came to the race for European football. Very few, if anyone, had them down as Scudetto contenders. Yet here we are, 15 matches in, 13 wins and 2 draws later. Napoli have an 8-point cushion at the top of the table, and they have momentum on their side. So what has changed? In terms of what has actually changed, much of it seems to be psychological. Expectation was way down after those summer departures and after another near miss last season. Lest we forget, Napoli began the campaign with 8 straight wins. There were 12 matches unbeaten to begin the season, and their first defeat only came in round 13 against Inter, curiously, their next opponents in Serie A. So the Napoli fans were more willing to give an opportunity to give time to these new players to settle in, not that they needed it. Kvaratskhelia hit the ground running, scoring in his first couple of matches against Verona and Monza. Osimhen was fit and firing, and crucially, they had cover for their all-time record signing. When Osimhen had got injured in the previous 2 campaigns, Napoli's form tended to dip. The same went for Koulibaly last season when he was out through injury first, and latterly with the Africa Cup of Nations. Yet this time around, they seem to have provided greater squad depth, and Luciano Spalletti is the man who has moulded the entire squad. Plus, players that were already at the club have stepped up and found an even greater level of performance. Giovanni Di Lorenzo is now thriving as his role as captain, having taken the armband from Lorenzo Insigne. Alex Meret, who so often appeared a rabbit in headlights when afforded the opportunity, is now benefiting from being first-choice goalkeeper, having previously suffered when coaches tended to chop and change, frequently preferring David Ospina. And one mistake against Bologna aside, he has been a completely transformed figure between the sticks for the Partenopei. Amir Rahmani flew under the radar, with Kalidou Koulibaly getting a lot of the headlines, and the same has gone for Kim Min-jae this season. but the Kosovo captain is a hugely underrated figure and someone who really glues Napoli together at the centre of defence. And now they just have so many options elsewhere with the likes of Raspadori and Simeone, two summer recruits. Matias Oliveira has been a perfect backup or understudy to Mario Rui, and at times has even looked like becoming first choice in that position. And what can we say about Piotr Zielinski and Stanislav Lobotka, two players who really are at the peak of their powers under Luciano Spalletti. And he's a man who deserves a lot of credit. He didn't shy away from the challenge in the summer when he was asked to bring down the wage bill and asked to work with these group of players. He could have easily gone elsewhere. Instead, he is the man who has somehow got Napoli playing champagne football, not only at home, but abroad as well. And I think so much of this comes down to the fact that those previous players were tainted by those failures, for want of a better word, in the past, albeit not winning the Scudetto for Napoli was not necessarily that, and they felt burdened, whereas this current group of players are unshackled by the expectation of the past. And there's a real feel-good factor in Naples at this moment in time surrounding the team. Whether they can sustain it remains another matter. We have seen Napoli threaten to win the title in the past. We have seen them flattered to deceive as well in recent years. So there's no guarantee that despite that 8-point lead at the summit that they will necessarily go on to complete the job. But you do feel they have a greater chance now than ever. They were starting to run out of steam towards the winter break, which sounds a preposterous notion given they are on the back of a 11-match winning streak. But now they will come into the new year fresh, and two of their first three matches are crucial against Inter and Juventus, and they should have Kvaratskhelia back from the treatment table, he who missed the final three matches of 2022. So in conclusion, I think it's simply a case of Napoli not being anywhere near as bad as people made them out to be this summer, people not necessarily being informed as to the quality of the players they were bringing in, and why should they? Kim Min-jae and Kvicha Kvaratskhelia were not players that Serie A followers had necessarily seen a great deal of. And also, I think people forgot that Insigne had gone a season where he'd really struggled to score from open play. Koulibaly was making more mistakes than we'd become accustomed to seeing from him. And even Mertens had become more of a bit part player. Fabian Ruiz, glorious on the ball, capable of spectacular goals from outside the box, but his head had been turned by Paris Saint-Germain. So once Napoli realised those players didn't want to stay, that they were willing to open up a new chapter in their career, perhaps with the exception of Mertens, who felt he should have stayed on, albeit for greater financial terms than the club were willing to offer. Once that realisation was made, Napoli turned over a new leaf, and they have simply not looked back. Time will tell as to whether they can finally go on and win the title. You can just imagine the scenes in Naples. It will be bedlam should they succeed on that score. They could even go very far in Europe, having won 5 matches and lost 1 in the Champions League group stage to top their group. A tie awaits them against Eintracht Frankfurt. But for the moment, Spalletti and his players deserve only plaudits, as does the senior management at Napoli, the much maligned De Laurentiis, and the sporting director who I mentioned earlier, Cristiano Giuntoli. All in all, it just goes to show how psychological football is. The mental side of the game should not be underestimated, and the weight of expectation, which has so frequently burdened Napoli in the past, was not evident at the start of the season. But pressure will now increase. The fans are almost starting to expect a Scudetto come the end of the season, and it will be interesting to see how this young, inexperienced group of players handles that particular burden. That's all from me. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like, subscribe if you haven't done already, and I'll be back with more content very soon. Goodbye.